My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
I'm Hallie Warner. Today's leadership quote is from Lao Tzu. A leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, "We did it ourselves."
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become irreplaceable, game-changing leader assistants.
Please review on iTunes. You're listening to episode 17.
Hallie Warner is the Chief of Staff to Adam Hergenrother. She has worked side by side with Adam for over 8 years, ensuring that his vision is communicated and implemented. As Chief of Staff, Hallie works closely with the executive team to manage special projects, hire and grow talent, and maximize Adam's reach through events and strategic communication. In her free time, Hallie pursues her hobbies, reading, blogging, kayaking, and traveling, preferably to the beach. She lives in Williston, Vermont, with her husband Bill and their dog Karma. You can check out the show notes from today's episode at leaderassistant.com/17. Now let's get right into the interview. I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Leader Assistant podcast. Today's guest is Hallie Warner. She is Chief of Staff at Adam Hergenrother Companies. Hallie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. So let's jump right in. What was your very first job?
Well, aside from, babysitting when I was like 12, my first real job was at a summer camp. I was I was a camp counselor or something like that. Quickly realized that was not anything I wanted to do in my life. But my first real job out of college, and I did retail and that sort of thing. And my first real job out of college was working at a nonprofit as a PR and marketing assistant.
Nice. So what did you learn in that job that you've been able to apply in your EA and Chief of Staff career?
Yeah, I learned a couple of cool things. One, I was surrounded with a lot of really incredible female leaders. So that was just really kind of empowering to see and watch them, navigate their careers. I learned a lot about just how to work in an office environment. It was my first, office job. So just really the basics of how to navigate relationships with your coworkers and with your supervisors, and how to just operate office equipment. That was really key. And I think I also learned how to take ideas and really present them. I mean, they weren't doing a whole lot of things like innovative things with social media or, online advertising. And it was again nonprofit, but just getting the message out online. So I presented a lot of ideas to them and realized, hey, they took my ideas and we implemented them, and that was just a really good confidence builder for me. So,
how long have you been an assistant?
Yeah, since then. So that was 2007. So basically my entire career. And while I don't really consider myself an assistant anymore, only because my roles evolved, I'm still assisting and leading my executive every day. So my whole career, really. Yeah.
So what's the difference? So you're currently Chief of Staff. Depending on who you talk to, Chief of Staff has a different definition. What's the difference between a Chief of Staff and an executive assistant?
Yes, I get that question often. So there's a few caveats to this. So depending on the size and scope of the organization, they sometimes overlap. For many years, I was operating both as an EA and a Chief of Staff. Sometimes the Chief of Staff is really operating as an EA. Sometimes an EA is really operating as Chief of Staff. When all things considered and the organization is such where there are both of those individuals existing in an organization, I feel like that's usually the best way to explain it. Or if you're thinking about the president has a chief of staff and the president has an executive assistant, right? The EA is more tactical and the chief of staff is more strategic. Again, there's often overlap. And when there's only one person in the role, regardless of their title, they're usually doing both. But as I kind of grew in my career and we hired an EA, I now am working just really on strategy, working on more leadership projects and special projects with Adam, my executive. And our executive assistant handles the day-to-day operations of the executive office, scheduling, travel, immediate requests and needs, and like just that really tactical stuff that's just a little bit more task-oriented and detail specific, where I, again, do more strategy projects, a lot of creative work.
So what's another title that you've heard of or seen that is similar to chief of staff, but in different settings might be called something else?
It's a good question. Sometimes it is executive assistant. So I've seen executive, I'm going to forget what it's called, but I want to say like executive business partner I've seen. And I have, sometimes it's a VP role that's operating as a VP of whatever, right? VP of the communications or VP of public relations, operating as a chief of staff. But usually they have kind of dual titles. It's usually chief of staff and VP of whatever.
What about if you go to like a really large organization, like you'll see chief strategy officer?
Yes.
How would a chief of staff, you mentioned you're really doing a lot more strategy. How would they interact, or would that be kind of a whole different ballgame with a large enterprise?
Yeah, I don't know if I could really speak to an organization that's that large. I mean, we're a smaller startup organization. I'm not exactly sure what a chief strategy officer does. I mean, like what their general role is. Is it strategy for the company? Is it strategy for a certain business division? Is it? I mean, really, it could be anything. Is it strategy?
Pretty vague,
yeah. Is it strategy for the executive? I mean, I feel like the chief of staff is the one who doesn't actually have a particular division or one responsibility. Like I would imagine the chief strategy officer is responsible for specific deliverables for a business division or a business function, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that a chief of staff does not have a specific deliverable for any particular business function, but rather to bring all of those leaders together and make sure that everything's being communicated up to the executive and from the executive down throughout the organization, so that everyone can achieve what they need to achieve as quickly as possible.
So if there's not a very clear deliverable in a lot of those cases, how would you, if there's an executive assistant that wants to become a chief of staff, how would they propose that, and how would they put together, a job description or a clear expectation and deliverables for kind of proving out that role and proving out the salary increase and all that kind of stuff? Yeah.
Well, first, I always say the first thing for them is they really need to understand what the differences of the two roles are. I've often talked to executive assistants who then they learn what I do, and they're like, oh, I wouldn't actually like doing that, because they love being in the details and coming up with, these insanely, amazing itineraries and travel and being involved a little bit more personally within the executive's life. And so I think that it sounds really cool and sexy to be the chief of staff, but the reality is it's just a different job, right? Mm-hmm. So getting really clear on that first. And then if they, determine that getting outside of that more of the day-to-day, the really high-level detailed stuff is what they want to do, one, in our organization, for example, you need to go hire your replacement. So if you want to give up those responsibilities, you better have somebody else who can take it over at a really high level, or else you're going to have two jobs. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened to me for a little while, until we could find somebody else who could do it. And then I really think it comes down to proving your leadership skills, because it's all about leadership and communication. Really for both roles, but I think particularly for the chief of staff, it's leadership and communication, and building out the proposal is just here's what I could do if I could run alongside you a little bit more without having to do X, Y, and Z. So I imagine that EAs who are already have chief of staff on their brain are already doing a lot of the things. The problem is that they are also doing all of the EA responsibilities, and therefore they can't actually achieve the chief of staff role at the highest level. So I really think it's less about, doing all of this other stuff and actually about getting rid of a lot of the detail-oriented work so they can focus just on strategy and how do they maximize their executives' reach? How do they get them new business opportunities? How do they better communicate the executive's vision throughout the organization? What will that do for the company? How will that increase clarity? How clarity is power, but clarity is also speed. So the more the chief can help the executive provide that clarity on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, the whole organization grows that much faster.
So I think I'm probably, if you were to look at my current role, I'm probably more of a chief of staff, but I also, as you mentioned, I also do the detail, EA stuff.
Yeah.
So is this something that if there are other assistants listening who are in the same boat as me, where what you're describing is what they do? My thought has always been, okay, there's going to be a point. We're a small company. I'm the only EA in the company. We have like 60 people, been around for 2.5 years. So my thought has always been, okay, at some point I could hire an assistant to work with me and kind of take over, be able to jump into more of what you're calling the chief of staff type of work. So if somebody's listening thinking, wait a minute, I pretty much am the chief of staff. Is it something that EAs should strive to become? Put it this way, if they're already doing all the chief of staff work, should they seek out that title change? And or does it depend on what industry they're in? Does that make sense? Is that something that all EAs should strive to become, in your opinion?
I think it goes a little bit back to what I said in the beginning, only if that's truly the position that they want. Like about 5 years ago, I did a bunch of soul searching and where did I want to go in my career? And because I'm in a smaller organization, I work directly with the founder. We're constantly building new companies. I'm like, okay, where do I see myself in the next 5, 10, 15 years? So I did a lot of research on various positions. I looked up COO, I looked up chief of staff, and did really in-depth research on what do those people do in their career. And I was like, oh, this chief of staff is exactly what I am doing and where I want to be long term. But like I said, not everybody actually wants to do that. So first they just should all EAs strive to become chiefs of staff? Sure, but only if that's actually the job that they want, because some might be better suited to be a chief administrative officer, or maybe they should be a COO, or maybe they should move into the communications department or the marketing department. So I think it really depends on where you want your career to go. And if many EAs are already operating as a chief of staff, then yes, 100% ask for the title change. That's exactly what I did.
And then have you seen in industry research and market research, have you seen that the title chief of staff is typically at a higher salary level than executive assistant, or does that also depend on size of company and industry and all that?
I think it totally depends. I mean, I hate that answer because it's so vague, but I really think it depends. I think in startup environments, it's probably pretty similar. I think the larger the organization becomes and the more, if you've got one chief and you've got 20 EAs servicing various executives and departments, yeah, sure, it's going to look different. But yeah, I think it's a little bit dependent on the size of the organization and the scope of the role. Yeah.
What's the biggest mistake you've made as an assistant, and what did you learn from the experience?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I always have 2 stories that come to mind. One is a little bit more of a tactical example. It was when I was first learning how to interview and hire people, and we have a very specific process for that. And this was 8 years ago, but it has stuck with me, believe me. And one of our processes is when we are getting references, we make sure that they sign. We like to go 3 deep, what we call 3 deep on references. So we speak to 3 references, and then we ask them who else do they know that we should speak to. And then after we talk to those people, we ask that second level, who do you know that we should also speak to about this candidate?
Wow.
So yeah. We like to know who we're getting into business with. So we have them sign a form, like a waiver, basically, that says, yes, you can speak to my references and anyone else that they recommend that I speak to. So I said, okay, great. And, this is like the first time I've ever done this. And I failed to get that signed. And I ended up talking to like a second level candidate and then the candidate or second level reference, the candidate found out. She was so upset because she was just trying to protect this friend. It wasn't that she didn't want me to speak to her. She had stuff going on in her life personally, whatever. She didn't want me to bother her. I didn't know that. Right. Mm-hmm. I didn't get it signed, and she never signed. She returned it with her references, but she didn't sign it. And I just missed that she hadn't signed the form. She withdrew her candidacy. We probably would have moved forward with her. She was great. So that was a big lesson in there's a process. You follow it for a reason. You need to double and triple check everything. And that, relationships are really important because for her, they were super important to her. And that just reminded me how I don't want to take that for granted or ruin a relationship for anybody because of some, dumb error that I made. And then, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what's the other? You said there was a different one. A couple came to mind. I want to hear all your mistakes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've definitely made mistakes here and there over the years. Another one was actually more recently when we hired an executive assistant. She and I were both kind of in Adam's calendar, and we realized she hadn't put something in yet, or maybe I missed it. And then I confirmed that yes, Adam was available for something to speak at an annual dinner or something for a hospital because he's friends with the president of the hospital. And so we confirmed that he could be there, and then to come to find out he actually couldn't. So what I learned from that was one person needs to own the calendar. And I was so used to doing it for 7 years that I was just like, oh yeah, I can handle this, and she was putting stuff in, I was putting stuff in. And then after that, we immediately said, no way, I'm never touching that calendar again. Even if I have to just email her and tell her to put something in there, only one person can own that and be in there.
That's a great tip.
Yeah. Yes. And it just reminded me that I need to let go and delegate and leverage. And I don't need to be doing everything, particularly when we hired somebody else to do it. Yeah.
What's your best tip for managing constant interruptions?
This is the one that takes time, but it's setting expectations with people. There's lots of different ways that you can do it. We have a pretty good culture of time blocking, and that's just something that we've talked about for many, many years. So everybody understands that concept throughout the organization. I'm working on my one thing right now. So if you say that to somebody, they know that that's kind of blocked, uninterrupted time, whatever your most important task of the day is. So again, it takes a time, but it's building that culture. And that's certainly something an EA or a chief can do, is help build that culture of structure, which we've done. And then the other, I think, is just setting expectations with people. And I know it's way easier said than done, but that can be anything from, yes, great question. I have time at 3:00. Can you swing back around and I'll talk to you then? Or great, I'd love to talk to you about that. Can you shoot me an email and we can schedule a time so I can give you my full attention? And oftentimes I just use that same phrase over and over again about scheduling time with me. And then what I realize is, one, hardly anyone ever gets back to you and wants to schedule the time because they were just trying to, bothering you or interrupting you because they knew you could answer the question quicker than they could if they just took 2 minutes to do it themselves. They need a break. Their energy is low, so they're searching for a way to get some energy. So they're looking to somebody to talk to. Again, if you ask to schedule that time, by the time that they've actually take the time to email you back and schedule it, they've usually found out the information themselves. And then the rare people who do actually get in touch with you and schedule your time are ones who are worth getting on your calendar.
Yeah, I agree. I use that practice every day. So
yes. Yeah. And it's not easy all the time, especially when people are at you. And now I don't necessarily use that for Adam. He's really good about, respecting my time and Amy's time. Amy's our executive assistant, her time, and because he knows how much work we have to do. But if he needs something, he's an exception. We stop whatever we're doing for him.
Yeah, I do the same.
Yeah.
So you hired an assistant as you kind of stepped into the chief of staff role. What should executives look for in an assistant?
Oh, so much. I mean, I want to say, details and organization almost go without saying, but there's in planning, great. I don't want to say always strategic skills, but really being able to problem solve creatively is really key. And then there's some more of the intangibles that we look for, and I would encourage executives to look for, which are adaptability, flexible, fast-paced, being super responsive. We like to see a little bit of intensity in people, hungry, humble. They have intense self-motivation and drive. Somebody who is comfortable leading from behind and leading through influence. Somebody who has high emotional intelligence. Those are just a few. I could keep going.
Those are great.
Yeah.
Those are great.
Yeah.
What's one productivity hack that you can't live without?
Oh, I don't know if it's a hack, but every week, this is probably not really a hack, but I'll tell you something that helps my productivity. Every week I complete this form, and it's called a 411. It's for 4 weeks, 1 month, 1 year, with the intention of if you're hitting your goals every week, you will inevitably hit your monthly goals. And if you're hitting your monthly goals, you're going to hit your annual goals, right? So every week I fill out my 411. I've done this literally for almost 9 years, every single week for 9 years. And I fill that out at the end of every week. It preps me for the week ahead. If I'm ever in a moment where I'm like, geez, what should I reprioritize, or what do I need to focus on next? I go to my 411. Adam gets a copy of that every week, so he knows exactly what I'm working on that week. And when we do our Monday morning meeting, if we need to adjust or shift something, we can. Usually we don't. Whatever I'm working on, he and I already know I need to be working on at this point. But it's just a really great tool. It's not like a long task list. It's like, what are the 3 to 5 most important things that need to be accomplished this week? And those inevitably, again, will help me hit my monthly goals and then hit my annual goals. And it's not just for business. There's actually a personal financial component to that and a personal goal component to that as well.
What format or software or tool template do you use to kind of keep track of all that?
Yeah, it's actually literally called as a 411, and it's from the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. If you go to the theonething.com, there's actually a ton of resources on there, all about productivity, time management, time blocking, and you can actually download a copy of the 411 right there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd recognize it. I've read that book or listened to the audiobook, and I thought I'd recognize that from somewhere. So speaking of books, you and your boss, Adam, wrote a book together.
Yes.
It's called The Founder and Force Multiplier. Is that correct?
Yes, The Founder and the Force Multiplier.
So what do you mean by force multiplier?
Oh, yeah. I believe that a force multiplier is somebody who extends and maximizes the reach of whoever they're working with or for. Now, that's such a simple kind of definition that it's like any employee could be a force multiplier, right? We really are honing in on the force multiplier as the executive assistant and or the chief of staff for an entrepreneur or an executive, and that relationship, because it's very different than, a relationship with the executive and a COO or a CMO for a couple of different reasons. The main one is the executive and the executive assistant or the chief of staff. In our case, the three of us, we're all working on the same thing and the same project, right? Our COO is working on a whole bunch of stuff that we don't necessarily know about, and she's not involved in what Adam and I and Amy are working on. The force multiplier is somebody who's actually working. They're all working on the same job with the executive. The force multiplier is just doing specific parts of that project or specific parts of that job. So together we're all kind of one big brain, just doing different pieces of one thing.
When did you decide that you were going to write a book with Adam?
I think it was the end of 2017. We started thinking about, okay, we definitely want to write a book. What are we going to write a book about? And we toyed with a couple of different topics. And then after looking at our blog and what blog posts were really resonating with our audience and which were the most successful, anytime we talked about the EA and the executive relationship, they just blew up. So we were like, okay, this is our topic. And then we just kind of got to work.
Was it your idea originally, or was it his idea?
Oh gosh, that I honestly don't know. So at this point, it's like we have the same ideas at the same time. It's almost like who just says it first. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember who actually had who had the idea. It was just part, through dialogue and conversation, and
that's fair.
Landed on it. Yeah.
What would you say to other assistants who are considering writing a book?
Do it. I mean, really, just go do it. It's not as difficult as you think it is. I think, especially in that assistant space, like EAs, executive assistants, admin assistants, we're just like desperate for great information about the role and about how to build our careers, and whatever angle that an assistant is going to take is valuable, because it's from their perspective, it's from their experience. And I mean, I read as much of that stuff as I can get my hands on.
Do you have any tips for writing a book or finishing a book? Because a lot of people start things, start books, start blog posts, start ideas, but then what are your tips for finishing a project like a book?
A deadline is really helpful, even if it's just a self-imposed deadline. Setting aside the time. All the content is probably in your head, and it doesn't have to be perfect when you first get it down on paper. Really, the key is you just got to get it all out there, and then you work with an editor, and they can help you, reframe or reorganize paragraphs, or and just do your copy editing. But really, it's just writing it, and it's writing it and not worrying about it being perfect. And we set aside, like Adam and I went back and forth and talked a lot about the book, and we, brainstormed and we wrote a lot of content and stuff together. But at the end of the day, like, writing is a kind of a solo activity. Mm-hmm. So I took a week, and I literally just wrote it in basically a week, based off of things that he and I had written previously, based off of blog posts, compiling it. And it's just setting aside the time. Get a deadline for yourself and set aside the time and make it happen.
What's the number one biggest challenge that you've had as an assistant, and or that you've heard from other assistants that they've had?
Probably my biggest challenge, while it is no longer a challenge because I have overcome it, and it took many, many years, but my biggest challenge for a long time was just, honestly, working too much and not taking care of myself. And not putting myself first. Big challenge. And I would argue that that's probably one of the assistants' biggest challenges. And often other assistants will tell me that, boundaries are a big issue for them. Boundaries wasn't actually an issue for me. Like, Adam never imposed on, me, and I didn't have boundaries that were ever an issue. So that wasn't an issue for me. It was just, I am so driven to work that it was almost like an obsession. Like, I just need to work. So I've gotten over that, thankfully. I have a little bit more balance in my life, which is good.
So did you burn out?
Absolutely. I left at the end of 2017. I quit working with Adam at the end of 2017 and went back in very early 2018. Thankfully, we had a conversation, and he was like, "Yeah, look, how do we make this work?" And which is great, because we've done amazing things since in the past year, and we wouldn't have been able to do that if I had not come back. So
what was your red flag, or was it kind of post red flag when you burned out? What was the thing that kind of was like, oh, when did you wake up and say, oh, you know what, I need it, I'm done?
Yeah, I did not know I was in burnout. Burnout is like a foreign concept to me. I don't understand. At the time, I didn't understand. I just thought hard work, I can do everything. I don't need any help. I can, that's just my personality. So I didn't recognize that as burnout until it was like way too late. Some of the little bit of the stuff that probably was more relevant to me was, it felt like I was not in alignment with my role. And that was because I was still an EA, working as an EA and chief of staff up until about a year and a half ago. And then it was after we hired our EA at the end of 2017 where I was like, okay, I felt like I could breathe a little bit, which interestingly enough was also when I left, because I was like, oh, Adam's going to be in great hands. It's time for me to go do something else, that kind of thing. And then I did. And then, Adam always likes to say, like, when you're in the struggle, you want the struggle to end. But then as soon as it ends, you're like, oh man, I kind of missed the struggle and the challenge. Right. Which is exactly what happened to me. So then, I took like 30 days off, and it was I needed a vacation is really what needed to happen. I needed like some time off. We talk about that now. Like, okay, when people have been there for a really long time, let's just give them a sabbatical or something.
Yeah.
And then, it was about 30 days later. It wasn't even that. It was like 3 weeks later. I was like, okay, I am so bored. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? I missed that struggle and that constant challenge and problem solving and helping build businesses and, being part of the leadership team. And so when I went back, I was in alignment because I was so out of alignment because being an EA is actually not my gift. And it's not actually where my strength lies. It's much more in that strategic chief of staff role. And yes, I could do both, and I could do both for a while, but that was part of the reason why I was burned out. And I think that's why a lot of people burn out is it's not necessarily the hours, because when you're doing something you love and are in alignment, you're in flow. It doesn't matter how many hours you're doing it. Right. So, for me, it was just being out of alignment of my natural behavior and my, desires of where I wanted to be spending my time.
So going back, when you went back, and since then, what have you done to prevent the same thing from happening again?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is that we have Amy, who is our executive assistant, and I, of course, would never want her to leave. But in the event that ever happened, we would immediately rehire for that position. And Adam and I have talked about that. Like, there's no way I will do that job and my job again, maybe for like a week or two, but that's like about it. So that's one of it. And just, making sure we're constantly building a bench of talent so that, people's lives change, people move, whatever, so that we always have somebody ready to go. That's a big thing. And I am really making sure I paid attention to myself and my relationships, and I'm not just so focused on work, and that I don't have my entire identity wrapped up in Adam Hergenrother's chief of staff. I'm also Hallie, and it's okay if I want to, watch Game of Thrones or Real Housewives and, read fiction. I don't always have to be on all the time.
So I've experienced the dehumanization aspect of being an assistant, where people ask how you're doing, but then they really want to know how your boss is doing. And you just mentioned, you're not chief of staff, you're also Hallie. How do you kind of balance that, and have you experienced that before? And was that part of your, when you burned out, was that part of it, potentially the dehumanization of it?
Well, thankfully that's not actually been my experience, is the dehumanization. If anything, that was me putting that on myself. And thinking that work was everything. Yeah. That was not imposed by anyone other than myself. And I know that is other people's experiences, that dehumanization. I don't know if that's Adam always did a really great job at this, or it really is just part of our overall culture that we actually talk about it. The first hire that we tell any entrepreneur to make is an executive assistant. Like, we are in our company culture, not just our company, but the greater Keller Williams Realty community. It's often talked about like how important that role is. So again, that hasn't really necessarily been my experience, but I do know that is an issue.
Well, and that's interesting. You said that it was self-imposed, because I think I haven't thought about that too much, but that's totally real. Like, you kind of take the human element out of it because you're so ingrained in the work, and you don't take care of yourself, and you forget that you're a human too.
Yeah. And there's no one to blame for any of that but myself, and not waving a white flag or saying any, like, I need to just to unplug for a day or whatever. And, Adam always encouraged me to do that and take time off. And are you getting your workouts in and whatever? And there was just like this part of my brain that was like, I cannot do that. I need to succeed, So yeah, nobody to blame but myself on that.
Yeah. So let's close with what makes someone a leader in your mind. What makes someone a leader? And this podcast is called the Leader Assistant Podcast. So my aim is pretty clear in that I believe the assistants are leaders, and it's just a matter of how do they use and how do we use that influence that we do have for good, and how do we really step into that leadership role. So what do you think makes someone a leader, and maybe specifically what do you think makes an assistant a leader?
Yeah, I think the greatest form of leadership is influence and influential leadership. And you can do that no matter where you are at and where you are in an organization. And I think it's developing the confidence assistants know what to do. They know what to say. They probably know a lot more than many different people in an organization, but sometimes it's just not having the confidence to say it or to step into that meeting. And I say, just go for it. And because the chances of somebody saying no to you are slim to none. And if anything, it's just showing up. It's showing up and it's doing the work and it's speaking up and taking on projects, volunteering for higher level responsibility, even if you don't know if you can actually do it or if you've never done it before. It's knowing that you can figure it out, because everything's figure outable. So just take those leaps, get outside of your comfort zone, role model the behavior of a leader every day when you show up. Challenge other people's thinking is a big part of influential leadership. So how can you challenge your executive's thinking? Are you challenging your coworker? Not in a negative way, but challenge your show a different side, show a different perspective. Getting people to change the way they think and the way they perceive the world is one of the greatest things that you can do. And that's all leadership. Great.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show. And where can we find you online, and how can we support what you're doing?
I might be one of the few Hallie Warners out there on social media. So I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Just go find me. You should be able to find me pretty easily. If you're interested in any of our upcoming training or events, you can go to adamhergenrother.com/events. We do have a couple of things coming up. And then you can go to, our book is on Amazon, Founder and Force Multiplier. Yeah, those are probably the main places.
Great. Well, I'll put all those links on the show notes as well, so people can more easily find you.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thanks again for being here, and we'll hopefully talk soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Hallie Warner. You can check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/17. Also, don't forget to join our thriving and growing Facebook community at facebook.leaderassistant.com. And lastly, take a minute to check out my Assistant Challenge. It's a 30-day email challenge for assistants. AssistantChallenge.com is where you can check it out. We'd love to have you join us.
Help my dad out and leave a review on iTunes. GoBulls.com